A woman identified herself as Det Melik and began explaining her situation, claiming she had previously appeared before the court as a plaintiff in a matter involving a property management company. She described a dispute that began when ownership of her building changed hands. According to her, the new management failed to respect tenants and entered properties without proper authorization. She alleged misconduct ranging from interference with personal property to financial irregularities, insisting that her rights as a tenant had been ignored. As she continued, her explanation became increasingly scattered, shifting between accusations and past agreements. The judge attempted to refocus the discussion, asking whether her argument related to a motion to set aside a prior judgment. She responded by referencing earlier proceedings, including what she believed was an agreement that would allow her to remain on a month-to-month tenancy. However, the judge pressed for clarity, reminding her that the court needed to address the specific legal issue at hand. Despite this, she continued to interrupt, returning repeatedly to claims about verbal promises and alleged wrongdoing by property managers and attorneys. The court issued multiple warnings, urging her to stop interrupting and allow the process to proceed. Her frustration grew as she insisted that she had always been willing to pay rent and that any confusion stemmed from conflicting information provided to her. She described repeated attempts to obtain written confirmation of what she believed had been agreed upon, stating that she had waited months without receiving documentation. At that point, the judge paused her testimony and turned to the opposing counsel. The attorney representing the property management company clarified that the earlier small claims matter had already been resolved and had no relevance to the current case. He explained that the defendant was a month-to-month tenant who had been properly served notice to vacate and had failed to appear at scheduled hearings, resulting in a default judgment. He further stated that a lawful eviction order had already been issued and emphasized that there was no legal basis to overturn that decision. Addressing the defendant's accusations, he denied any misconduct and described repeated, excessive communication from her, including numerous voicemails and allegations that he characterized as unfounded. When the defendant attempted to respond, the judge again reminded her to refrain from interrupting. The court made it clear that the only matter under consideration was whether there was sufficient legal justification to set aside the existing judgment. Personal grievances, verbal agreements, and unrelated disputes were not part of the issue before the court. Despite repeated explanations, she continued to argue that she had been misled and treated unfairly. She insisted that she had acted in good faith and that the situation resulted from broken promises and inconsistent communication. The judge, maintaining a firm tone, explained that even if her claims were true, they did not constitute valid legal grounds to reverse the judgment. The court emphasized that the plaintiff had followed proper legal procedures, obtaining a judgment, requesting an eviction order, and securing its approval. Without a legitimate legal basis, the court could not grant her request. Ultimately, the judge denied the motion to set aside the judgment and refused to halt the eviction process. However, in a limited exercise of discretion, the court ordered that any escrowed funds would be returned to the defendant after a set period rather than released to the plaintiff. When the defendant asked for additional time, the judge acknowledged her request but made it clear that she was already beyond the standard timeline. Still, the court granted a short extension, delaying enforcement of the eviction until a specified date, giving her a brief opportunity to vacate voluntarily. The judge concluded with a direct warning: further interruptions or resistance would not be tolerated. The ruling stood as final, and the defendant was expected to comply within the given timeframe. As the session moved on, a second case was called, another landlord-tenant dispute. The landlord explained that she had served notice after a rent increase and reached an agreement with the tenants to vacate by a specific date. Relying on that agreement, she arranged for new occupants, only to find that the tenants had not left as promised. The tenants responded by explaining delays caused by unfinished renovations at their new location. They stated that their move depended on those improvements and that they required additional time to relocate their belongings and business equipment. The judge carefully broke down the legal process, explaining that even if an immediate judgment were granted, eviction would still require additional steps, including filings, service, and enforcement. ultimately extending the timeline regardless. Seeking a practical solution, the court asked both sides to agree on a realistic move-out date. After discussion, the tenants proposed a date later in the month, and the landlord confirmed it would be acceptable. With that agreement in place, the judge issued a ruling granting possession to the landlord, setting the agreed-upon date as the final deadline for the tenants to vacate. The court strongly advised compliance, warning that failure to leave voluntarily would result in formal enforcement and additional costs. The hearing closed with a clear message. Cooperation would save both parties time, money, and further conflict. The court's decision stood, and the responsibility now rested on the tenants to follow through.